and we are the co-founders of Dipper.
Dipper is a technology platform that guides professionals of color to a better workplace, one review at a time.
Dipper is your safe space. It is the time for you to share your voice with the community that you are a part of. Visit us and join today at ourdipper.com.
Hello. How are both of you feeling today? How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Glad to be here with you all.
Oh, we are so excited to hear and have you here as well. I know folks are going to start tuning in any minute, any second now. But we have a very, very important topic to talk about today. And I'm so happy that we have a special guest to shed some light on this topic, right? But the topic here is Black Twitter has a lot to say about Queen Elizabeth. And let me tell you, it's not good. But why? That's the topic title. Right. So what if somebody or someone widely loved created destruction and trauma for many people? Should that be forgotten? And is this even something we should talk about in the workplace? See, since the passing of Queen Elizabeth, I have observed an outcry of pain from folks that love Queen Elizabeth and folks that carry the weight of generational trauma from her leadership that led to genocide, colonialism, and systemic gaps. So many people practicing allyship want to understand why there is a level of high resentment for Queen Elizabeth from the Black, African, Indian, Indigenous, Irish communities, and more. So on to you, Jacinta, to welcome our incredible guest today.
Yes, thank you so much. And I know, I've been waiting all week for this conversation. So we are so blessed to have a guest with us this afternoon. And I'm so glad to meet you. This is my first time. But Dr. Cleo Manago is a writer, educator, speaker, and Black African defense-focused human rights activist who founded Black Men's Exchange National, BMX. He is the Chief Executive Officer for the Pride Center of Maryland, a creator of the coveted Critical Thinking and Cultural Affirmative Action, or CTCA methodology, and Trans-Breaking Racism and Oppression, Trauma-Induced Behavior and Intervention. I hope I did that introduction some justice, sir. It's a lot, and you have the credentials. We're so glad to see that you're a featured Black scholar. You're featured in the Black Scholar Journal of Black Studies and Research, and the Journal of Black Psychology, and the American Journal of Public Health. And we're so glad to have you here today.
Well, I'm glad. I'm sorry. I'm glad to be here, and I look forward to the conversation. And I must say, you know more about what Black Twitter has said than I do, but I know a lot about Miss Elizabeth, and have some issues that I'll raise during our discussion concerning Black people and Miss Elizabeth.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And let's dive right into it. My first question here is the historic context of colonization and its current impact on Black culture, society, economy, and trauma. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that is, and how does that even intersect with what we know or what we may not know about Queen Elizabeth?
Well, the latter part of your question, what we may not know, is my concern. And all of us know the history. I mean, we are living the history. Your name is Netta Jenkins. Your name is Jacinta Mathis. That's a result of the legacy of Queen Elizabeth and her comrades in terms of the people that have created the colonization, contamination of the planet that we know of. But it's important to understand that we live in the shadow of her family's reign and history. And it's kind of obvious that the English We're speaking English. It's the first language of the country. And there's even African countries like Nigeria and Ghana where English is the official language. And there's people who are attorneys and judges in those areas who I joke and say you're just like RuPaul. And I joke because RuPaul wears a blonde wig, and so do the judges and attorneys in Nigeria and Ghana. And just like the George Washington wig that we have on our $1 bill. So I'm not sure, and I go by your guidance, but I'm not sure if the history is as important as the impact of the history, because we're living in the impact of the history. For example, before Queen Elizabeth died, we always heard at least yearly about the goings on of Buckingham Palace and who's getting married and what they're doing and what the Queen is doing. And my question is always why. It is a rhetorical question to trigger thought. Why are we hearing about somebody else's king and queen in a European country? For example, most people don't know who Lady Julia Osei-Tutu is.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows who that is? Okay, I'll tell you who that is. Lady Julia Osei-Tutu is the Queen of Ghana. Mm-hmm. She's the wife of Onfuo Osei-Tutu Asehene, who's a king of Ghana and the Gold Coast, whose bloodline is older than England. But we don't know who that is.
Mm-hmm.
So our whole narrative in terms of how we view the world is borrowed by force from Queen Elizabeth and her family and comrades and people like her. So again, I'm glad Angela knows who that is. But I've asked that question many times. And if you go on Google and look up Queen of Ghana, guess who comes up? Guess.
Queen Elizabeth.
Queen Elizabeth. Comes up as the Queen of Ghana.
Right.
So the contamination of Queen Elizabeth and her family and her legacy is pretty profound. But my goal, as opposed to simply talking about how horrible she is how much we don't know our own history in many cases, and how we're not offended by having to hear about Queen Elizabeth at all, because we need to know why. And that's a question I asked earlier. I mean, she's not the queen, or she was not the queen of the United States of America. So the question is, so then why do we keep hearing about her?
Right.
And it's funny. I know it's not my question, Netta, but you raised such a good point, because I even personally, I was like, should I be mad? And I was like, and I recognized that I was pointing my energy more toward how can I just learn more about my people and my family, and also make sure my daughter knows about that. Like, rather than me like rage tweeting, how is it better that I just invest in more institutional knowledge in my mind of like who I am, where I come from, and how to influence my own community. But like, why do you think folks are turning to social media almost for like group therapy? You're seeing countries come together in their opinions. I'm seeing some humor that people are sharing, but I'm also seeing anger. And like some folks, I saw a post the other day where someone went on a rant comparing to how this is like if people were teasing about Martin Luther King dying or Rosa Parks dying. And so why do you think that people are right? It's like that could be its own conversation. Why do you think people are kind of finding like refuge in venting? And why do we need to do that? Do we not need to do that? Like, kind of, what's your perspective there?
Ooh, that's a heavy question.
Sorry.
I'm gonna try to get through it. A lot of people, and I don't know who these people are, because like I said, I have not followed the anxiety and reaction to the Queen's death, because she's not a center of my life and I don't care about any of this. So I haven't followed. However, what's interesting is that we're waiting until she dies to talk about how offended by her we are. Mm-hmm. I was offended when she was running around the palace, when she was still around. because I was like someone just said, one of your watchers, about how what I see here. I see thievery, I see murder, I see someone who has co-signed the slaughter of Africans, who has sat over the enslavement of African people and other people in the world. So I don't look at her with joy and, oh my God, it's the queen. I look at her, oh my God, it's the thief. I mean, how I look at her. And what's interesting is that we seem to be fearful, and I think the reasons why are important, or apprehensive to talk about these things on a daily basis, so we can deflect the impact that it has on our consciousness and behavior. Because what we're not looking at, I mean, first of all, you just said, and I almost fainted metaphorically.
We don't want you to faint now.
That they were comparing her to Martin Luther King, etc. I mean, Martin Luther King and the other people you mentioned were freedom fighters. Mm-hmm. She was a freedom taker. So it doesn't make any sense to make that comparison. But what people are doing is they're looking at symbolism and name recognition. They're looking at that we know who she is. And that's why I asked the question earlier, well, why don't you know who Julia Jose Tutu is, who's a living queen? Because of white supremacy mythology and its relatively unchallenged existence in our lives. It's almost politically correct to talk about Elizabeth now that she's in the news and she's died, but we should deconstruct and deflect the impact of white supremacy mythology before people die, because frankly, they kill our spirits. They kill our self-concept. They kill our capacity to be logical and to think from an automatic perspective on protecting, preserving, and embracing other Black people. We're taught to question our value because our value system is based on the myth of inferiority of ourselves in comparison to them. So when they die, we get broken hearts. Some of us don't. Thank goodness a lot of us didn't, but many of us did. Many of us, oh my God, the queen. And I'm like, oh, did Aretha Franklin already died? What are you talking about? You know what I'm saying? I'm talking about Black people. You know what I'm saying? But again, I take these opportunities to get us to check our behavior and check our impulses and check our point of view and gauge how contaminated we are so we can decontaminate. Now, is it clear what I mean by decontaminate?
Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, somebody already implied that we don't know our history. I've
Right.
already implied that while not knowing our history, we keep hearing about, for example, a monarch from another country, which has nothing to do with us. And instead of, in too many cases, us going, wait a minute, why are we hearing about this person? We're concerned about the wedding. You remember the wedding that happened with that biracial woman? We're all into this instead of going, wait a minute, why are we even having this conversation? Why does another queen, why does Queen Elizabeth matter to the larger system that keeps controlling the narrative? Because they are doing social control. Am I making sense? They are making sure that we praise them and their ethos, their culture, and their history. I mean, I'll say this real quickly so I won't talk too much before you talk. Remember critical race theory?
Of course.
And how the foundation of that pedagogy was to get us to unpack the real history of this country, particularly as it relates to people that white supremacy has dismissed or marginalized. Well, it was quickly thrown out. But we get to hear about Queen Elizabeth. Do you see the dichotomy here? There is a brainwashing agenda here that we need to be alive to so it won't work.
Right. And I think it goes back to what you were saying too. A large part of this is education, right? We can't just hone in on one narrative, which is what we've been led to do throughout our entire lives. We really have to dive into, okay, do we understand even our own history, the complexities of it? And then how do we begin to break away? Because what I like to describe this as is the oppressive mindset, right? Many of us as Black people, we are suffering from the oppressive mindset. At times we can't even disconnect when we want to because of the the toll that slavery has really done a number on us from generations to generations. And what we saw with Twitter and LinkedIn and a lot of these social platforms is people educating other people, which is what I love about social media, right? Because that led to then folks diving into, hey, what does this mean? Some folks didn't even know what Queen Elizabeth stood for, right? Or the context or the implications and the impact of that. So I just think it's very interesting, and I love to hear you, honing in on the educational aspect so that we can break away. But can you talk to us a little bit more about how can we begin to break away from that oppressive mindset? And I know your background is like in the behavioral aspect as well.
Well, first thing I want to say, which might sound too simple, is that it's a decision.
Mm, yeah,
Simple. For
yeah.
example, when you are eating food that causes you diabetes,
Hmm.
uh, you typically, if you have a good doctor or have some sense of self-love or self-preservation interest, you go, okay, well, let me not do that.
Hmm.
Or, for example, every single day of our lives, those of us who drive or walk, we make sure that we stop at the red light in most cases. And that doesn't take a long, drawn out process or research paper or treatise to stop at that light. We
Hmm.
know that it's important to save our lives that we stop at that light. So I'm
Hmm.
saying we stop at the red light. I'm saying to stop at the white light.
Hmm.
I'm saying for us to make a decision to step out of white supremacist norms and be critical thinkers about how we navigate through this society. So it's a decision. Now, what makes that decision complex is that we live inside of a culture, I'm talking about Black culture, where over generations we normalize intrafamilial or intra-community anti-Blackness.
Let's talk
And
about it. Yeah.
it's us questioning our beauty, questioning
Mhm.
our worth, questioning our hair, questioning our nose, questioning our value as human beings on the planet Earth, questioning our relationship to the human story. That
Mm.
gets in the way of us simply making that decision. I mean, we call each other the N-word every day, and I want to make clear that we're not doing these things because we're deficient or something is wrong with us. Some of us only speak English. I don't know how many languages you speak, Miss Jenkins, but I know you've had direct blood access to other languages.
Oh, of course.
And
Hmm.
so you know what it's like, and there's people in your direct lineage who know what it's like to step out of white supremacy linguistically into a whole nother language frame of reference.
Oh,
Well,
absolutely.
most of us as African Americans have no idea what it's like to be unimprisoned from English,
Hmm.
unimprisoned from a language that has no such thing as the term Black slavery.
Hmm.
It's only slavery, which implies it's already Black. Y'all are slaves, so why add Black and have to breathe extra to say the other word? But there is such thing as the term white slavery,
Hmm.
which is
Hmm.
considered, oh my God, there's white slavery, but there's no such thing as the term Black slavery in the English lexicon because white supremacy mythology has us thinking that Black is associated with slavery, so why waste the word Black and just call it slavery? Well, that's
Hmm.
ironic because the term slave came from Slav in England. But excuse me, in Europe, pardon me.
Hmm.
But my point is that I'm gonna back up again and say it's a decision, but it has to be an informed decision and an encouraged decision by each other. But we have to unlearn. First, we have to admit that we have been doused in white supremacy mythology all of our lives, including religiously. Like over half of us pray to a mythical white God, or the implication of white God through a white Jesus every Sunday. And some of us don't miss church on Wednesday.
Hmm.
So all of this training, it's not education. It's different between education and training. Education edifies
Hmm.
you. Education affirms you and helps you to be better at being who you are. Training brainwashes you. And
Hmm.
this is what they're doing when they keep talking about Queen Elizabeth and Buckingham Palace, which is not even in this country, or when we hear more about the Jewish Holocaust, which more than we do about that we were enslaved and there was the United States Holocaust. These are purposeful narratives so we can stay confused in what I call the post-white supremacy trauma trance.
Hmm.
We are in a
Hmm.
trauma trance. So I can say intellectually, oh, it's easy, it's a decision, and that's still true. But if you're in a trauma trance, and I'll give you one more example of what I mean by trauma trance. There's tons of examples, but I'm sure you sisters have met a woman, and maybe even a male, who's intellectually brilliant, but who's in an abusive relationship and won't leave. And you said to them, if what are you doing?
Right.
Well, he loves me. My point is that they are in a trauma trance.
Yeah.
So that person was able to seduce them, regardless of their genius and their capacity. They have been emotionally injured by all types of influences as women, frankly, in terms of patriarchy. And that's a whole another topic, but it's directly related to white supremacy mythology. However, the bottom line is that people who hang out in abusive relationships because they think they can't get out of it, and that's when they leave and they realize that they can, but they stay there because they think temporarily and sometimes all their lives, depending on how well the trauma trance and the trauma, how deep it is. But once they realize that they can get out of it, they always could have got out of it. They always could have made that decision.
Yeah.
But the trauma trance, which is a lot of us are in, and frankly, talking about Queen Elizabeth instead of Julia Osei Tutu and not knowing who she is, as opposed to this person, and Asante and Queen Nzinga, instead of knowing who they are, we stay in the trauma trance. And that's one of the reasons why there was people who looked at critical race theory and said, wait a minute, if we make critical race theory a mandatory part of learning in this country, they're going to come out of the trauma trance and know who they are, and we can't control them as well.
Yeah, yeah.
We need to control them because we're a minority, I'm talking about white folks. We're a growing minority in this country, so we need to keep power. One of the things that they do, and this is going to sound relatively tangential, but it's all part of the trauma trance in terms of our inability to recognize what they do. You might consider that, and this might even offend you, but it's the truth. What's her name who just went to the Supreme Court? The woman, Ketanji Jackson, Clarence Thomas, Kamala Harris, all the black men who have a show on CNN, most of the people on TV who are called part of the LGBTQ community who are famous, what do they all have in common? Y'all know.
Tell us.
They all have white partners. They all have white partners.
It's very common. Yeah.
Every one of them have white partners.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not judging them yet. What I'm doing is I'm judging the methodology of why white people keep choosing those kind of people to have pivotal positions.
And how do you feel that like we talk to folks a lot too, because this impacts work, like these conversations, so many of us are working from home, some of us are going to work or in a warehouse or factory, and these conversations come up, and like even I dealt with people, some people are mourning, how are there any tips or like yes and like how do you feel we should like have these conversations in the workplace? And I think we have come into an era where there's never a right time or right place for conversations, so we should just have them. And I feel like I thankfully am blessed to be in that sort of environment, but everyone's not. So like, do you have any advice for when these conversations may come up at work or, in more like sensitive environments? How should we still feel empowered to, stand in our own royalty and possibly to educate, should we choose to?
Well, first of all, and this is very important, it's very important not to take a self-righteous, abusive stance. And it's very important not to re-traumatize the traumatized. And I'm mostly talking about Black people right now, even though there's other people who are traumatized as well. But the show, I think, and my focus is Black people. Sometimes we are so upset and offended by people doing anti-Black things or mourning Elizabeth, the Queen Elizabeth, etc., and judging it. And I always say, judging Black people for acting out internalized oppression is like judging somebody for limping after a car crash. We should be compassionate, and we should breathe and invite them into a conversation and use that invitation as an opportunity to not argue with them, but to educate them. For example, I've asked people, and I go into my my best Vanna White or Leroy White. Vanna is just a metaphor for being calm and just staying.
I like that, Leroy White.
And I'll say, do you know who Julia Osei Tutu is? And of course they don't.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, well, she's an African queen who's married to a king whose bloodline is older than Queen Elizabeth. Why don't you know about her, you think? But you know about Queen Elizabeth. That's why it's important to be, nice and not attack and go and make people feel stupid, because we can't help it. We can't help that English is our only language. We can't help that Congress dismissed critical race theory. Now, we really can help it, but that's another show that I'll be on in terms of that. We have a lot of power. I mean, I said much earlier that we have to decide, but I'm talking about the barriers to decisions. But right now I'm talking about how to interpersonally interact with people who you want to have a conversation with. Do not be mean and attitudinal and judgmental. Smile and be the one who's really, because first of all, you got to know what you're talking about, Miss Mathis.
Right.
And
100%.
one of the wonderful things about this Google stuff and a brain, because some of the Google stuff is BS. That's why I said in a brain, is that
you need both. You need both.
You can actually discern and do research and know what you're talking about. It's important if you plan on having a conversation about these issues to know what you're talking about. And also, as you're being gracious and nice, just do a lot of work around triggering people's critical thinking and their logic. Because it's illogical to be a person of African descent and not know your history. Right. However, the lack of logic is institutionalized. I mean, there's schools in this country now where they're trying to teach kindergartners and second graders, and it's legal and it's policy about LGBTQ. I'm sure you might have heard about that. Even in like in New Jersey, there's an elementary school where they're rolling out an LGBT curriculum, but they're not rolling out a critical race theory curriculum. Because one, a lot of people don't realize, and that's a whole other topic too, is that LGBTQ is also a white paradigm. I'm not talking about sexuality now. I'm talking about identity. I'm talking about identity and politics and who controls that. But my point in raising that issue is that we need to see what they're doing. We need to see and pay attention to, wait a minute, why is critical race theory, and stop settling for and adapting to white supremacist norms. Again, that's like adapting to an abusive relationship and finding excuses because your pimp or your controller has successfully convinced you that you don't have as much value as them. And African people have lots of value. They want us to be in the trance for a reason. And they want to change the narrative for a reason. And they have most of the movies and commercials, if you watch TV, have a black person with a white person. Have you seen that? Most. That's for a reason. A lot of us are so in the trance, we think, oh, that's progress. No, progress is showing black people loving each other. Right. And not being part of a drug deal like The Chi or what's that other show, Power, about a dysfunctional family where the black man won't even touch his black wife and run into a white-looking Latina. We need to look at that stuff, if we got to look at it at all. I advise you don't even look at it, but some of us look like movies with a critical eye.
Right.
Look at everything with a critical eye.
Everything.
And relax. More importantly, relax.
And even when you hearing, I think even in participating in conversations, right? And whether it's at work, whether it's here with us, like thinking and listening critically is so important. And understanding the context, because so many movements across race, gender, identity, all of that were started by Black folks. And it's almost empowering to stand in that and like us embracing that our own royal identity, but then like with you said, with like some compassion and humility and listening too. It's great advice. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Cleo, you dropped so many gems today, and I can't believe we are out of time. It is 12 p.m. right now.
So good.
But listen, the comment section is buzzing. People feel edified. They feel like they are truly learning. And now I know many of us are going to be going to Google, right, to search even more. So let's continue this education, right, so that we understand our history and so that we can make the decision to break away and identify the complexities within it all. So I want to thank you so much for, again, shedding so much light. To everyone that's tuned in right now, head to ourdipper.com right now. We want to continue this conversation. Let's not end the conversation here and then you fold your hands and you're like, oh, that was great. Okay. No. Let's continue this. So head to ourdipper.com, rate and review your company, every single company that you have ever worked for. Heck, do it even for your grandparents, right? We want to understand and know what's happening within the workplace, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. Thank you so much, everyone, and take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.